right, and we're live.
Well, hello, everyone. So glad to be here with you. And I want to say thank you to Paul Katz for inviting me to do one of the chats. I'm looking forward to it. And I'm looking forward to all your nice, friendly questions. And I want to say I was just maybe a little bit of cello history here. I was looking through some old programs from the Casals masterclasses when he was here in Berkeley in the 60s. And there's Paul Katz on one of them playing the E-flat suite. So he was a brave man, that's all I can say. And it was a wonderful time for all of us. But it was sort of fun to just a few days ago to come across Paul's name in connection with that. So that's a bit of cello history, probably hasn't been talked about for a while. They wanted a title, for what we were going to talk about today. And so I said articulation. It's certainly, there's so many things about the Bach suites we can talk about, but I thought that would be one thing that is a starting point, but I'm open to any kinds of questions. And, because it just stylistically, it's so important that our hands, we have notes to play in Bach, so many notes, and that our hands are so free and the articulation is so springy. And I think for the rapid notes, we really have to use more action than we would say, well, now certainly in a slow melodic theme, we would play very close to the fingerboard. But with the articulation of many notes, we have to, just as an actor has to speak as clearly as possible. We have to speak with our, I always feel, especially with Bach, that we speak with our left hands and we sing with our right hands, hopefully. So, but we need to have this sort of springy technique and sort of this kind of what I thought call a thrown action, where we, and then there's a kind of resilience. We don't hold our hands back, we give it a real bounce. And so on to get that articulation. And it's the energy of this very alive hand with the basic part of the hand just really free and moving with it, so that the fingers are just dancing. That's what gives us the rhythmic energy of the music, which is such a strong element in Bach. It's a huge element, having that sense of rhythm, not just metronomic rhythm, but that deeper rhythm, but so that we have it. For instance, what I'm trying to get across there, just as an example, when you're thinking about things consciously, they tend to be a little exaggerated and so on. But I'm wanting to give certain notes stress, but I don't necessarily want to do it with time and stopping the flow of the music. So I feel that there's just an extra energy where both hands have the energy at the same time. Because sometimes when we try to find our articulation in certain important notes, because we have different levels of notes with the counterpoint and so on, we sometimes do it with time, and yes, sometimes it's fine and appropriate. But if we have this other energy that's with the two hands really working the energy, for instance, the where we're running notes in the second gavotte of the C minor. that's I'm trying to get the idea across. And of course, with that as well, everything, the bow is equally, maybe even more important with is part of it. But I, started out talking about uh, the left hand, so that was I was trying to show that. But unless there's a good contact, and actually with Bach, we think we have to learn all the notes. We think through our left hands, but really, when we're playing the music, I find I get the most direct musical content that I want is when I really think the music through the bow, because that's where the sound comes, after all. Just even the theme of the fugue of the C minor, there perhaps the bow starts taking on a very, very strong importance. Sorry, speaking. And so on. And that's where we can learn a lot from our Baroque bows, which give us more and if we let the bows teach us, they show us, my feeling is that one doesn't want to use the technique that one uses with a modern bow on the Baroque bow. You want to let the Baroque bow teach us how. I first got my first Baroque bow in the 60s when I started getting very interested in finding out all of the things that connect us with the music of earlier times. And it has such one of the biggest differences, the modern bow has such a good, clear articulation at the beginning of the stroke. Excuse me. But the Baroque bow gives us a whole range of resonance, the overtone resonance, which then, because what I found is because the bow teaches us how to do it, we can transfer that quite a bit to the modern bow, not entirely, but quite a bit to the modern bow. But I think what I sometimes think that is, people get a little mixed up when they take their technique from having played the modern bow when they start finding it Baroque bow and then start just playing, and also it affects where we play. For instance, I tend to play much higher up when I'm playing with a Baroque bow. Sorry. I want to get the singing détaché and those kinds of strokes. And so on. So there are a lot of things for us to think about and discover. And that's the incredible thing with Bach. We're never through finding out things. I find during this period, especially where we're so much more alone, that there's so much, the Bach is so satisfying. It's still difficult. So to play well, and we keep discovering things and how the voicing, this belongs to that phrase and that belongs to, except, the next day. That's what Casals would say. He said, whatever you do, play with character, say something, even if tomorrow you say it differently. And the point is that the Bach gives us the chance in the writing to find different ways. That's why we have so many different interpretations and editions in the old days, so many, I think I counted at one point about 80 different editions. Now it's very interesting. We have, of course, the Anna Magdalena and the other manuscripts from people of Bach's time. Unfortunately, we don't have his, and that certainly has affected how we play it. And of course, much more of the writing is in the manuscripts is separate, whereas the 19th century editions were very much slurred because the phrases often are longer phrases. But that's where we have to develop our on the modern bow now, and it's I can't quite get the resonance that I had with Baroque, but it's all these things that we could constantly be studying and learning and so on. So I don't know whether there are any questions in yet. Otherwise I don't want to go rapping on. Okay, go to it.
Our first question is from Micah Lane. He
Okay.
asks, "Good afternoon, a professional flutist here trying to learn to play his father's cello. Could you
Okay.
please give me an example of the various stages of learning various articulations from basic to
Oh
advanced?"
my. well, interesting thing, the Quantz flute method, which was, of that time, is where I found some different. I just want to throw, since it's a flutist, I want to throw in that bit of my own information of where I've learned over the years, where I've, investigated and been curious about things. Where he talks about the actual some of the cello techniques, and with the Baroque bow of holding it up here, or he says there that one can hold it back. Interestingly enough, when and I'll get to maybe try to answer some of your questions. When I don't know if you can see it, this bow has a very interesting frog, where the thumb, and Eva Heinitz, who was a gamba player, but also a Baroque cellist. uh, she's been gone for quite a long time, but she came over, I guess, in the 30s. But she had been Furtwängler's cellist for St. John's Passion or any of those or gambist, I should say. And right away, she took this bow when I showed it to her. It's a Dodd, actually. It's a copy of a Dodd transition bow, which he made. I also have a Baroque bow that Bill Salko made in the 60s. It was his first Baroque bow. I asked him to make one. Anyway, she took it right away underhand, and of course the cellists in that day, like bass players, some of them played still underhand. Yeah, they didn't all play overhand at first. So all of these things are interesting. Well, I think if you're learning the cello, you need to be, what are some of the basics? You need to just be learning rather than getting too fussed about this or that or style. I think it's important to work on the basics of getting a really beautiful sound quality. I mean, that's the wonderful thing about the cello. It has such a quality, and you need to get your use of the bow and your sound. So, and that's also very much training your ear, because that's the crucial thing of really hearing ourselves play the way what's actually coming out. And that just takes the basic habits of being balanced, of being relaxed, free. I don't like to use the word relaxed so much, because it kind of feels like blah somehow to me, but free. Everything needs to balance and free, and our bodies need to be very free. And then finding the quality of sound. A little bit, our teachers or whoever helps us, especially if you're beginning or if you're trying to find your own way, your biggest guide is your ear, because when it starts sounding well, when it sounds well, it means you're doing things well. You can't have a good sound if you're tight. I mean, you might have a sound, but it's not going to have that quality and ring and so on. And to discover the bow, for instance, probably if you're just starting for yourself, you're using a modern bow, and you'll find all of the things that the modern bow does down here, but also then finding the feeling of what it feels. It's a very different arm motion. I mean, in fact, you use different parts of the arm depending on which part of the bow. So you want to find, here we have we're down here, we have the forearm working with the hand and wrist and fingers. Up here, it's really important to have this upper arm very freely into it. And in terms of the Baroque style, it's a question of getting comfortable. One of the things that often happens when one's beginning, one tries to play these long strokes, and that's one of the hardest things you have to do. I think sometimes it's very good to just first of all, find the balance of the bow and find out what the most pure sound is right in the balance point, and then try to find that same quality, and then find the different sounds and how how your arm works in different parts of the bow. I have a feeling I haven't really carefully, I mean, it's been a little haphazard the way I've tried to address your question. But, you know, as a starter, I think let your ear guide you, because when it sounds well, you're doing something well, you're doing something right. Okay, right.
Sure.
Another
Okay.
one? Yeah.
Yes, we have a question from Brennan McCabe asking, could you talk about how you approach the stilted bowing in the Prelude of Bach 4? Any advice on making it sound smoother?
The I didn't understand what was the adjective, the what bowing?
The stilted bowing, he says.
Tilted, does that mean the beginning? The is that what's meant? I
I believe
guess.
so, yes.
Yeah. Okay. Well, let's see what the Baroque bow teaches. I don't know. I don't hear a whole lot of difference. I think one of the things I know that I got very much from Casals when I was working on this with him. He wanted me to be using more bow. I was, you know, probably. And, you know, in a way, to get it speaking down near the frog and not too large, it's easier to do, frankly, because you have the balance, you have the weight of the bow, you have the weight of your hand, and so it speaks. But I think he didn't want a lot because he didn't want it to get on the surface, but you know, and it's so that there's kind of an activity to it, and one gets one's arm into a kind of rhythm, and one choreographs it in a way, because sort of get the rhythm. But it's very important to have that sense. And for instance, I want to have that feeling of the bass is going through, and it's the pedal point at the beginning. But we also have a melody. I want that, and I want. So I want. And then you have your harmonic fill-ins. So you want those to have, and doing it without sometimes one hears it where people take time and almost add an extra eighth. So you have, or cut it. So you have a very strange rhythm all of a sudden, you know, and especially since it's repetitive, if it gets into a pattern, that's not good. It needs to have, and you see, because with this prelude, and well, so much about, it's not you have melodies, even or if you have a melody, you see you have these melodies and the harmonies. You need to find the differences of them, but at the same time, really the phrasing is harmonic phrasing. So we need to have the sense of finding out how the phrases fit together, and then where you modulate into a new phrase, a new harmony, excuse me, and where the harmonies are intensifying, and also where they're relaxing, you know, and then you have that prelude has the toccata, has the cadenza, the free things, and then back to the chordal harmonic phrasing. You need, so much of what we do technically, of course, completely has to be what the musical demands are, so that it's no one single technical thing in terms of getting the connections and so on. But I find motion, you know, motion helps. You just have to be careful it doesn't get up on the surface of the sound, because you want you want the largesse of the E flat major and feeling that you're getting the bigness of that. So hope that helps a little.
Sure. Um, Oliviero asks, "Hello, I'm trying to play the Brahms cello sonata, and I find that on the C string the sound comes out a bit lifeless, except for open strings. My pressure on that string seems okay, and I have Yarger strings." I think he's just asking for advice in that case.
I guess he's talking about the E minor, I would suspect, because,
Yes.
well, this is a very interesting question. Most of us probably developed our vibratos on the A string, and so we get a vibrato, which may sound pretty well on the A string. Well, that may not work, and the vibrato will help get get the depth and resonance of the sound and bring it to life on the C string. But we have to, it's just the physics of it. Now I'm really don't know what I'm talking about, but obviously you do have slower vibrations down there. So your vibrato needs to be more in tune. I mean, a faster vibrato, which works well on the A string, just doesn't, you just don't get the throb. It's also just getting the arm weight. Just use down here, if we just really allow the arm weight to sink in, and that's not pressing. It's a question of really just using the weight of your arm, first of all. Okay, there's the pure sound. I'm looking for that whoa, 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 whoa. Now, here on a cantilever range, it's where we have the glorious singing sound on the cello. So, which is very nice sound on the E string. Okay, what happens if I use that? It's sort of nervous, and it doesn't really fit that range. We need to. I'm talking about vibrato in this, you might think if you're talking about sound, I'm talking about vibrato because vibrato is what brings, it needs to be a sound that enhances this motion that enhances the sound, brings it to life, but it also frankly amplifies. If you do exercises with vibrato, going from a still vibrato and then a still finger and then bringing it slowly, pacing it and building it up wider and wider and faster and faster, and then taking it back down, you'll hear without changing your bow at all. It's easier to practice this kind of thing on the A string. You find your sound really amplified because of the vibrato. So that's another factor, And frankly, if we've learned a vibrato up here, I have to work on that because, especially sometimes if we're excited in performance and so on, our vibrato is quite naturally faster, And when I get down to the C string and really want to get something that has that live throb to it, I don't mean yo yo yo, but something that then sometimes I just think lazy. I just think, let it be lazy. Another thing that's totally important about vibrato is how the bow is connecting with your vibrato. You can have a perfectly good motion here. If you're not connecting with the right weight or speed with the bow, it's not going to work. If it's not in tune, if you're not in the center of the note where it's going to have the overtones, you're working with the overtones on the instrument, it's not going to have the same quality. And I think that one of the things since I'm now getting very ancient, that I hear in so many somehow in cellists, and the cello playing is just developing so incredibly. There's so many incredibly fine cellists. It's marvelous. But because of the bigger holes and because we're wanting to show that the cello can do its stuff, there's a lot of pushing of the sound uh, where it becomes less flexible, you know, and you feel that the person, they're going after a lot of sound, but because they're pushing down to the bridge and so on, they're not getting the variety of color and the variety of sounds that are possible on the cello. And if you work more with the overtone ring, that amplifies fantastically. You know, the earlier cellists who played their whole careers. I mean, Salisbury played his whole career with gut strings. Well, if you push that down, you know, it's just going to crack back on you. But the point is, he was known for a sound that really carried. He played in Royal Albert Hall with 6,000 people and so on, and they heard him fine. And because he worked so much with overtone, that was just the way they produced sound in those days. It was a different kind of sound production. And I think it's really important that we not lose that. We need to learn from what has come before, and then, yes, progress on from there. Sure, that's great. That's great, because the demands are always, the music is getting more and more complicated, and the demands are always, you know, I've played a lot of contemporary music earlier in my life, and let me tell you, practicing proper etudes didn't help that at all. I had to be able to go, you know, over the instrument and that kind of thing. Just new techniques that are just part of what the younger cellists do, and it's very exciting. But one needs to not forget some of the things that we've learned, you know, from older ways of doing things as well. There's no reason why it has to be either or, and I think going after the quality will always carry. I feel in a hall, and I've had the chance to play with orchestra a lot, and it's you know, this is a wonderful old cello, and it does have quality and so on, and I've never had trouble. But it's not like one of the powerhouse instruments. You know, we've all had the chance to play some instruments that have an enormous natural sound, and they're fantastic, and that's, you know, they need to be out there being played. But I think also variety and quality are very essential things that we get to have in our playing. So, okay, thanks.
Sure. Elizabeth Peters asks, hello from Germany. Could you please discuss the different slurs possible in the prelude of the first suite?
Oh, well, yes. Well, there are lots of opinions about that. And there's so many different editions. You know, one of the things that sometimes bothers me a little bit, it's wonderful that we have so many different possibilities. We've always had a lot of different editions, because cellists feel, you know, take into their own personal playing and their own personal musicianship their own reactions. We all, you know, the Bach suites belong to all of us, but we all feel that they're very special to each of us personally as well. And so there used to be so many different editions. I think I had about 40 at one point. I'm not sure what I have now, but mainly what I'm finding is very interesting. I love the Bärenreiter with the I have the copy where you have all the manuscripts right on top of each other, but they are also editions. They're of his time, but they weren't from Bach. They were what the cellists wanted to put in, so they're also edition. And the Anna Magdalena is the closest that we have to what she was copying from Bach's own manuscript, of course. Yeah, so a lot. I think the main thing, you know, sometimes people get wound up with the details. And especially if they're saying, well, we want a Baroque performance, we don't want a romantic performance. They feel that sometimes that if you play what's supposedly more your text, it's going to be a more authentic performance. No, the criterion is what the melodic and harmonic and contrapuntal phrasing is, and how the music is put together and what we need to hear. And of course, when I learned it back in those days, it was the editions all pretty much were. And so on. Then you have all the variety of the various more text where you have, and sometimes, especially if a person is well playing with the, I'm not playing, I just took my Baroque bow, but with the modern bow, you hear. For me, that's kind of notes. It's not necessarily the phrase. I think if you want to do that particular, what do we have? We have harmony, melody, and then harmony. Or, for instance, what Casals, of course, recorded them, but then later he played one. By the time I was studying with him, it was. And so on. But he didn't really play completely legato. He didn't play. In other words, that had a little bit of articulation, just as the way when we're playing 16th notes, we don't play necessarily, I mean, you know, in virtuoso phrases, we don't play necessarily, even though the bowing is by the half note or something like that, we still play so that the notes can pop through. And I think it's the same thing. In terms of, though, to your question about how you decide, I think you decide by the harmonic and contrapuntal phrasing. And actually, you know, sometimes when we were studying, you know, I'm talking quite a bit about Casals because there are not that many of us around still that worked with him, and we need to not forget our legacy. You know, there's so many marvelous cellists since and developing all the time. But the point is, that's, you know, it's some of these things that he also, you know, he also, well, so much he taught himself actually, but also discovered a lot of things. And it's that spirit of constantly exploring that is really important, you know. But I think that if we, you know, sometimes with the students, or he would take just one student a day, but we get bowings and fingerings from each other's to save time in lessons, you know, so we come that much more prepared. And sometimes he'd see that, and he wouldn't, and then he'd start showing us something else. And it wasn't that the music changed that much, but what did change was some of the details, where he changed here or changed there, and so on. But if you have the understanding of the harmonic and contrapuntal phrasing, then you're, and what notes, the important notes, and the fill in the harmonic notes, and all of those kind, and it's that understanding that I think that we need to use as we work on them, because, you know, that's what's going to make musical sense. So it's well, and it's a constant study, you know. And actually, I remember hearing him play some in public too during that time, and he was doing some really different things than we had worked on the week before, that sort of thing. I remember once asking him, you know, whether he would make his own edition, and he said no, because then it would be carved in stone, you know, and it would be settled and finished. And he said, I want the ability to be able to play in different ways, but the basic musical intent was strong. And I think if you use that as a criterion and try different things, don't get locked into just one way of doing it. Try different things. You'll constantly discover things, and you'll constantly discover yes, different ways. Just, you know, when we talk, I mean, think about an actor. If they have every day have their part to play, I'm sure they never give it twice exactly the same. Maybe very similar, but it wouldn't be exactly the same. And the same thing needs to be with music. Needs to have that immediacy, and it needs to have that freshness. But we need to have absorbed the music totally thoroughly to have that, to be able to have that flexibility of changing and trying different things. So that's the best I can say about that, I think.
Sure. Nathan Chan asks, "Hi, Bonnie. I was wondering,
Hi.
what role did Marlborough play in your musical development?
Oh well, Margaret was great fun. It was great. It was also nerve-wracking because I was there in relatively early days. I was there in the 60s for quite a few years during the 60s. It's a very important festival and summer. And it that whole idea of the apprentice system, if you will, where you're playing with seasoned people that have been around for a long time or working very thoroughly. And the problem is, you see, in this day and age, uh, we 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 have to learn how to. We don't have to. We do learn things very fast when we're trying to put things together, and the level of technical playing is becoming so good that people. Well, I'll just tell you about I'm in one chamber music group I've had. It had I won't say where it was, but the players were very good. They came and then we talked about things, and they came the next week. It was just the same as it had been the first time. About the third time, I began to realize, they're just coming in sight reading things because they play so well. It can kind of be all right. And unfortunately, no, you have to spend time with music, and you have to let it sink in. I feel with the Bach suites, especially the last three, but all of them, one needs to let them. You can't just learn the notes and play them and then get up and perform them. You need to let them sink in, and you need to live with them for a good patch of time. I feel with some of the last ones, one needs to live with them for a year before you. I don't feel rigid about that. It depends. Each situation is different, but I don't like a person that's just beginning a work saying, okay, and I'm going to perform it on that day. No, you have to allow this music to get it, and that's the thing with chamber music. Where you're working with other people. You have so many different things, and you need to have the time. And that's one of the basic things with Marlborough. They do schedule it so you rehearse a great deal, and you don't necessarily know that you're going to get to perform the thing. There many more works are studied than are scheduled for performance. So it's for the basic idea of learning something. And that's kind of the right way around. We're so goal oriented and trying to get things just ready to play on that performance that sometimes it may be very efficiently put together, but it hasn't had the time. And music needs time. The technical abilities are getting better and better, really, as we, just constant, that's a given. Or more, I shouldn't use the word better. I mean, they're getting, well, they are. I mean, they're more efficient. People could do more, have more facilities, and that sort of thing. But the music itself still takes time. And that's one of the things about Marlborough. And because it's a very, well, many people want to go, so it's a very high standard. You're playing with other players that are also, at a very high level. So that's always a joy, and also just because, well, I was there very much when, of course, Serkin was very much there, and both the Schneiders and Casals was there a lot, and so on. So that not only the expectations were high, but also the attitude of why one was doing it. Why one was spending time with music. It's just to be that much better a musician, and to really absorb the music and live with it. And then if you happen to get to perform it, great, because that's what we, supposedly want to do. But it's the main thing of learning and spending time. So that I think that, but there are wonderful other, and I'm not going to start talking about them or listing, but there's some other wonderful chamber music festivals, and where there's a lot of very good, serious work going on, and for all the right reasons. So we're very, I mean, just as in the universities and colleges, and also very much the conservatories. That's what I love about we want to learn our instrument, work on our big repertoire and so on. But what I love about the education in this country now, which they were a little ahead of us in Europe on some of those, the contemporary music, of course, has been around because the composers want to have their works played. We don't work with composers enough. There's still not enough interaction. But I've always valued. Even though it's hard sometimes working directly with composers. But what's happening now, of course, is that the whole expanding into the earlier music and learning the tools and finding the nature of the sound, especially the sound of Bach. I think what the Baroque and sometimes I've had gut strings on my cello, which was 100 years old when the Bach suites were being. So I figure if I just let the cello play the suites. It was around for 100 years before they were written. If I get out of the way, it'll take care of it. That's sort of silly. But the point is that it's just part of the education now, that you can learn something. You still make your choices about what music you want to play and how, but the point is you can at least have that knowledge now, which was less available. It was much more, there were the specialists and this, that, and the other, but now it's a much broader scope. And I think that's excellent with the conservatories. It's been in the universities, the scholarly study has been around longer, but that hasn't necessarily connected with the performance. And so now the performance and the scholarly things are happening together, I think is really good, really good. So I think there's so much out there, and young students today just need to absorb what's there and just find as wide an experience as possible. You still need to focus some, but it's, I'm just going to go one other thing though. It's having the cultural knowledge and having the expertise and experience. But we need to be careful that we don't start just using the external details of how you play this, that, or the other. We need to go into the composer's music and find what's the nature of that composer. I mean, for instance, how different Beethoven and Schubert's music is. They need to be, even though they were written at the same time, they need to have really different techniques and really different concepts and different sounds often and that sort of thing. Or the way Bach and Guarneri, or that's not exactly the same period, but sometimes the people play some of the Italian music in the same solid early way that we might play German music. Well, it's different. It has the Italian has more the rococo and more the the fanciful and not so sturdy. So we need to go into the nature of the music we're playing, and that's what I love about what I've learned with the Baroque about Bach, because the clarity and the overtone ring of the sound with the tools of that day are so completely in keeping with his music. It could certainly be said that I use vibrato with Bach. I have, for instance, that's vibrato, okay? Except I don't play. It's part of just the energy of. Now, I'm not doing those important notes with bow pressure. I'm doing it because I'm giving you could say, okay, but it's just an impulse. So it's yes, you could say, all right, that's a vibrato impulse, but basically I'm using it so it articulates that note more. And that's different. And I'm a hybrid, if you want to call it that, but I want to learn from everything I can about how to make things sound in the way that makes sense to me, but also in my understanding of the music. I'm getting off the track. You better ask another question if there's one.
Sure. Borislav Strilov asks, great information. Thank you so much. Can you please show your both thumb position on the bow, and do you like to have it straight or bent?
Well, I don't want to say how this, that, and the other. depending on what you're doing, you need to have a thumb that will be strong and go straight. The problem is if you get jammed in there, then it makes everything else less flexible. I think you need to have a flexible bow. On the other hand, the same thing. If you have it just bent solid, um, it's also going to jam things. You need to have fingers on the bow that that can do anything you want. So I think that you need to have the flexibility with all the fingers. Just so. And this kind, I call it push-ups, but I like to do that. Just to this, because these bass joints are incredible for both hands. And it's very funny. I've found that there's hardly any other way that we use the strength of our bass joints, and yet just the bass joint, you could say it's wrist, but it's not so much. There is also wrist accent, but sometimes I've found, especially with older players, say adult beginners or so, if they've never done this, it's very hard for them to do what I call push-ups. It's just flexing these bass joints, and I think that one really needs to develop that, so you have really the use of that. Somebody, Andre Navarra, French cellist, who's a wonderful cellist. I was someplace at a conference, and I guess he'd liked my playing. He had heard me, but he felt that I needed more fingers on the bow. And it was very funny because we met in the hall, and let me get the cello out, and he was showing me. So. What is it? Wait a minute, how does it go? What does it do for number 7? If I don't know it by memory, it's really ridiculous. But anyway, just having that, which just gives you that flexibility, and it gives you more independence. I think, what I find, and there are times when, yes, you have to be very strong, I find that for that, I find if I get the weight down, I mean, for instance, playing the Shostakovich concerto, by the end of it, you're pretty tired, and where you're yum ba-da-dum ba-da-dum ba-da-da-da, and I've seen Rostropovich do it with that, and I actually did that a couple of times too. It works, yum ba-da-dum, where and for that, if you're still have your fingers up there, you do need to be pretty strong, but still, you're not as strong if it's tight. If it's flexible, it's like the idea of the bamboo is a very, very strong thing, and it has that flexibility. It's because anything that's rigid is going to be, my early teacher used to do that. We'd get up here in the position, and then she'd come over and just could pull our hands off, off the string. But if we were flexible and just using the weight, arm weight, then you're just clinging like an octopus is clinging, and you can't be pulled off. And I think it's the same thing with the bow and getting that strength of bow, which you're asking that about how to get something is having that flexibility. But it's so that's one of the things that we get bound up with, because our hands are so obvious in what we're doing. We think we have to, that's the final thing, but it's actually what's happening way back in our back. If we have the real power and weight coming. I've had that situation playing the Dvorak concerto where you have to start really dipping into the sound, and if you start getting into and this is connected with the question about whether it's straight, because I think it has to do with the basic thing you're asking, how can you be strong or so. If you have that, if you've tapped into your back muscles, you have a whole sheath of muscles down the back, and if you've tapped into that, you can get you can get incredible amount of sound. Whereas if you're just playing from your shoulders, let's see if I can do this right on the spot. So I'm playing just from my shoulder. Now, if I tap into my back, you see, it's not that different a sound, but I think it's a deeper sound. It's hard to, this is problem with Zoom. You can't really get these subtleties, and that's one of the biggest problem, whether you can't always trust what you're hearing as being what's actually happening. But I think there are two things about tapping into that. It's easier. I've had students say, but I'm not doing anything. Great, and it's a deeper sound. And that's the big thing about how we, use our bodies, has to do with what we're going to be able to do and how we're going to sound. We need to have that freedom of the body and motion, and movement, and just have everything really balanced. And it's very important because especially sometimes when things are hard and you're doing them, you're trying very hard, but you're sort of working against yourself and against the cello. I know one of the things that I've always felt when I've gone out on stage and felt kind of uncomfortable, which one can be because one's nervous, and I just try to consciously think, I've got to make friends with my cello and work with it, not work against it. And I think, and then that helps me to get past that initial stage. And I think it's that idea of it's constantly becoming more and more and trying things, but motion, movement, flexibility, freedom, and not letting tension build up. Which can happen in the bow arm, especially in the upper arm. It's like breathing. We have to really release things, so it's constant energy. Yes, and we have to, if we have to use more energy out here, and then and balance, not tension energy, but we have to find the way to get the leverage, and then it needs to release, because if we don't exhale as we get up here at the frog, where you have all the natural weight of the bow and the natural weight of the hand, then you don't have that cycling. So from the really the balance point on in, the arm should just move in that flexibility. So I think that's the basic. You were asking about a detail in the thumb, but I think it's a larger basic question in a way that you were and there are lots of exercises that one can do with the hand just to make it. I think what's important is not only have a hand on the bow, but to have also individual fingers. Actually, one thing with articulation that I would try to figure out with Casals, because he had the most clear playing, and his use of both hands and arms, everything was really free. The left hand, incredible string. But one of the other things that was clarity was sometimes just he never talked about it, but I tried to observe and figure out what was happening when I would hear things be very clear because of something he was doing with the bow. And it had to do, I think, with just a little bit different pressures with whatever finger and so on. And I was just speaking earlier about getting the power if you're playing something where you need a lot. Then I always find if I can actually, rather than levering in here, because past a certain point, all it's going to do is crush the sound, just getting that I go over to this part of the hand a little more, where I'm getting this arm weight really down in there. So it's all those things, and you can only learn them by experimenting, and somebody else can tell you do this, that, and the other, and a lot of times things help. But the point is, everybody has to find out for themselves really how it's going to work for them ultimately. I think, we get all the help we can get in different ideas, but it's by experimenting and using our ears to really find the sounds we want in the intention, and that it should still feel good. That's one thing I want to say, since I said about articulation and playing the notes. If one's using with Bach, where especially with the E flat suite or C minor 2, but even the D major, but especially the E flat, where you have so much extension, through it. If you're using your hand in a tense way, by the end of it, by the time you get to the G, you're just dying because you can't move. Whereas if you've been using your hand with the weight, balancing and also shifting the weight, because you can't walk with your weight in both feet at the same time. Same thing, same principle, is there's a slight shift with the arm always supporting the hand. Um, by the time, if you're doing that all the way through, by the time you get to the end, all the cobwebs have totally gotten cleared up, and your hand feels incredibly good. It feels incredibly, free and loose and strong, because so that's a big criterion. If you're practicing Bach and find yourself getting tired, if the left hand getting tired, you need to go back and figure out, slowly, and figure out why it's getting to, and figure out how to get the way so that it's constantly freeing the hand. You're not playing with a hand that's holding the weight, so the weight isn't being held through all of the fingers. It's simply the weight in one finger at a time, and getting that centered, and then it can feel wonderful. So you ask about a thumb, and I guess I talked about a lot of things.
Oh,
Okay.
no worries. Monica Scott asks, "Hi, Bonnie. You first showed me a very, very rudimentary Baroque bow when I had those lessons with you when I was 18. It transformed my idea of how to articulate Bach. Do you still have it?"
Yes, I don't know which one I might have shown you, because I've gradually gotten a few through the years, uh, uh, but possibly. And this is a very simple one that Bill Salco made, and it was the first one that he had made, but it was also my first Baroque book. I had a book by Rhoda, which was, somebody borrowed it and never gave it back. It's somebody, I wish they would give it back, but that was 30, 40 years ago, so I doubt if I'll see it. And I went in, and I really liked the swan's head, so I showed, Bill and I looked through the bows, and he agreed to make ones with the swan's head. And it's a little bit light for the cello in a way, but it's really nice. It's very clear. I love the singing détaché it gives, and it's very clear. It's just simple, and yeah, I love it. And actually, what I found, I've sometimes, when I've played, say, Leonardo Leo, he was a contemporary of Bach, concertos. They're very nice. They're about the same length as the Vivaldi's, but have some very interesting, beautiful chromatic slow movement and so on that are very nice. And at whatever time it was, it must have been in the 60s or 70s that I was doing some of these kinds of things. Um, uh, I had enough Baroque bows. I did it with string quartet accompaniment, and I had enough bows that I could give. And I found that this bow, that Bill made, the first one, was perfect for the viola. It's a little bit lighter than the one I like to use now. And I have some transition bows. There's some really wonderful makers all over the country, really good. And so and there's some that they're possible to just have as another tool that we learn something from. So if one's curious, it's worthwhile letting it teach you, not just bringing your modern bow techniques to the Baroque bow, but letting the bow itself teach you what all the different things it can do. It's great fun. It's just, part of what one gets to do as a cellist. It's fun. So hi, Monica, good to hear from you. Yeah, actually, I think, no, you're not quite the first person that I the questions have come from that I know. But anyway, it's very nice of you to ask. Yeah, come around when we can coexist again. And you can see some of my Baroque posts. I've been sort of giving them away, and I have some on the East Coast too, so that I don't have as many as I used to. I just love bows, because every bow that you play with, modern bows, definitely, wonderful bows. They're so each one teaches you something, and you find different dimensions. You find ways of doing doing things in different ways because the bow wants to be used that way, and so you're constantly learning new things in one's ability or technique or so. One has one's favorites, the things that connect with your own style of playing quite a bit. But I think of one bow particularly that I have is so perfect for Beethoven. It gets some qualities that are work, well, anyway, it's that kind of thing. And others that if I'm playing, I had one that it was really too heavy for me. I actually gave it to a big husky guy, but for the Brahms would be perfect for the Brahms double. I never had the nerve to use it, but because it was very heavy. And if you just used drone energy, you could get an amazing amount of sound out of it. But to hold it, and for the more delicate things, it was problematic, so I just wasn't strong enough for it. But it's fascinating how every single bow sounds different. And that's why it's very important to find bows that match with your particular cello. I remember once I had a nice Satori bow, and then I changed cellos, and it didn't work with that instrument, the new instrument at all. So I actually gave that away too, because it was, somebody else loved it, I think, and that was fine. So it's a fascinating, it's what we get to do. And actually with bows, I mean, going around between cellos is kind of an expensive thing to do, but bows are more reasonable, and they can make an amazing difference to one's sound, to how one's cello speaks, and so on. So.
Great. Christine Lee asks, "Hello, Bonnie. What advice do you have to find a bow stroke in the Courant in the Sixth Suite that is both light and agile and also articulate?"
Oh, well, don't expect me to do much. You have to practice these things before you play them. Well, I do some things backwards. You see, I'm using, and I would be if I were playing it, I use the Baroque bow if I'm not playing in too large a hall. I don't, anything past around 800, because your habits of levering in with the modern bow, if you need more feel and you need more sound, the Baroque bow just collapses. And I just don't have the courage to trust myself to be able to handle it, because I've had that situation where I've been in a large place and felt that I wasn't getting across. But so even then, you see, a lot of times what I've found also with the modern bow, the Baroque bow has taught me certain things about it, and there's a slight different chance. I find with the modern bow, I want to lean in more, getting more weight coming through the front of the hand, whereas with the Baroque bow, it doesn't, it collapses if you do very much levering in. You need to shift the arm weight slightly more so that you're releasing the sound, that way. So I still don't, I still wouldn't play, which I might do if I had only played it on the modern bow. I might play, I might play Right at the Frog with a spiccato off the string or something. I don't know, but I really like having it still with the I'm not getting it right now. I give up. Getting the overtone ring. So I get the articulation at the beginning and still have the overtone ring. And so on. And then some of those figures I do, but exhausted. It was, and very facile, it was kind of an amazing thing. I think that where you decide, you have to experiment with the bowing. I would try everything, Christine, and see what sounds the way you want it, get the articulation you want it to sound. There's no one way. And again, the difference of the bows or difference of one's own technique too. You have to decide. And you see, I'm also whereas most people, yeah, that's the way I like the upbeat. That's how I hear it. So I'm not playing I'm not playing all the eighths. Which is it's a running dance, and it wants to have the virtuosity. It's a really virtuoso piece. You want the tempo. So you have to decide interpretively, musically, what you want, and then find the way to the sound that you want. That's very important. You don't want the technique to give you your musical conception. You want to have the musical conception, and then find the way to do it with the technique. That's the right way around on that.
Sure. Joanne Grant asks, what do you think about the present practice of Baroque cello specialists adding a little rhythmic variation or perhaps a few extra ornaments in the repeats of the suites?
Oh, it's very good. It's very good. The improvisation, that was totally, tasteful ornamentation and so on. It's an art. People that are really, really good at it. It's absolutely fascinating. I am absolutely for it. I think one of the main things you have to just as a criterion is not distorting the music. That's where I sometimes hear things where people really take total rhythmic, especially, rhythm, harmony, counterpoint, all those things are kind of musically basic. I don't mean, you have to understand, I don't mean just in a metronomic sense. There's a kind of deeper musical rhythm and it has to do with the shape of it. And I think that that needs to be there. So, and sometimes one hears things that are kind of pulled around. We all do. I know, for myself, sometimes when I would find that I was sort of getting further and further away from the center, I would start just thinking about going back to center and feeling as if it's the bass line of a cantata or something, so that there's a kind of larger rhythmic thing, that can, but think about the singers, they take, but they prepare, and it's within the total phrase and so on. So there's that flexibility, but the whole thing of being able to do the repeats with good variety, absolutely, it can be wonderful if a person's really good at it, and one does get to hear some good things. The thing is, a little different than, say, Bach as opposed to Corelli. Say, with Corelli, you really need to, because it's much more bare in some ways, not entirely, but sometimes. Whereas Bach did put in a lot more of his own ornamentation, I think. But there's still plenty of places that that it's very nice, especially in the slower movements, to have some ornamentation before, just so it doesn't really disrupt the basic music, the framework. I think that needs to be the criterion of that. Yeah, well, that's an art. It's an art, and it's not something that you hear some very good people with it, but it's just as far as the general person, all of us playing Bach, we don't always hear the expertise that is important to try to develop if one's going to do it. And I've done it more or less at different times, but I've had to a little bit decide what I don't have the facility that necessarily just do it on the spot, whereas somebody who's very adept at that kind of thing, they'll do it differently, different performances, and it can be wonderful. Yeah. So the main thing is the framework of the music, the basic structure of the music.
Great. We have another question from Kristen Roberts. She asks, can you talk about your approach to trills in the Bach suites,
Ah,
the slow movements in particular? Thank you.
right, right. Well, again, clarity. Uh, let's see. I need to think of a couple of examples. Um, well, the, mm, let's see, where I need to. Uh, Now there, I'm going on, and I don't know. They're actually a colleague. Uh, uh, well, there are various things written, but there's some very good publications now about people that have really studied whether it's on the note itself or on the note above, and whether it's coming down. And so one needs to be, if one's going to be serious about it, one needs to try to study that. One thing that I do feel, though, let's see if I can find an example, um, is where you have a dotted rhythm. Uh, then I think one needs to stop on the strong beat. This is from the uh, now, because it's coming from below, or I'm not going to speak about whether it's from the, but these days one's hearing both. But the main thing I do feel strongly about is this, that we stop on the main beat so that we hear the note. Sometimes you see the trill, the purpose of a trill is to heighten, because also say it give exaltation to the note itself. So it brings to life that note, gives it more. Whatever it is. And whereas the other place that I was just showing in the I wouldn't, I probably wouldn't stop there. I would just trill. You see, so it has to do with the rhythmic context. If it's a dotted eighth and a 16th or so, I would stop on it, or quarter and dotted quarter and an eighth, I would stop on the main beat. I guess that's, in terms of the upper note or the lower note, I think, one just these days sees or hears quite a few different approaches, because also always came from the note itself. I've gotten used in many places to coming from the upper note. So and there's more and more scholarship that's been developed in these ways. So I think if that I'm going to avoid saying I don't want to pretend to know what I'm talking about really there. I do it personally just on a little bit taste, of how I approach it and how I like it and but that's not authentic. That's personal taste, but I do feel strongly about whether it's the upper note or one thing I do like, sometimes the lower note, one mordant I like a lot in places in Bach. Say, if I think about, in the Sarabande, the C major, when I remember ornamenting the repeats quite a bit, and I found myself using the inverted mordant. In other words, instead of that, I like very much that giving that inverted mordant. Just as a you see, all ornamentation simply wants to heighten whatever the basic music is, so that becomes a whole nother study. And there's plenty of material, that one can confined about. Again, it comes down to opinions, frankly, people's ideas of this or that, how it should be, or how they like it to be, and so on. So,
Um,
and there's quite a bit of data. Yeah. Okay.
sure. Megan asks, curious to know your personal bowing slash articulation for the G major prelude. I personally enjoy slurred with modern bow, but like three slurred, one separate with a Baroque bow. So I think she's asking
Well,
for your personal thoughts.
yeah. Well, uh, right. No, that's pretty good. I think what the important thing is, whether it's with the modern bow or uh, what what I don't like sometimes when I hear, and let's see, I'll just do it with a, is this. You see, as far as I'm concerned, that's notes. I think we need to still phrase it, so if we have then a release there, or sorry. Sorry. I'm just improvising. I don't know what I'm doing right now because I haven't really thought. I think that yes, I think that you're absolutely right that the bow can make a difference as to what one wants. Again, though, it has to do with the phrasing, and don't let our tools give us our musical ideas. We need to have our musical ideas and then find out how to make them sound with whichever bow, and yes, if you find that the different bows, again, that has to do with the resonance, and the fact that even though you can get some of the from learning some of the techniques on the Baroque bow, you can do some of that with the modern bow. It still is going to have the difference, because the even though we try to get resonance, overtone resonance with the modern bow, it still has a little more bite. It has a little more articulation at the beginning of notes and so on. Whereas with the Baroque bow, since it's a more resonant, softer in quality sound, you're going to get more of that overtone ring. So it can affect, definitely it should affect the how we both things. And I don't want to say definitively. I sometimes do different things at different times. If I'm going to perform something, I decide how I'm going to do it, needless to say. But I also am very open to experimenting. One thing I do like, for instance, in the C major prelude, when all the different bowings for that, and the original I really like. And if we get that, because it makes clarity, you get the pedal out, you get the melody out, you get the middle voice, which is very important melodically, and with that though, where it's harder if you try to do it with the getting the strings this way. If we give it with the pivot, so that it goes with the direction of the bridge, then it's much easier. You see, I'm going up a little, but mainly I'm going this way. Whereas if you try to do it, it's rather awkward, and it's to retake. So those are things that nobody told me that. I just sort of found it and learned it. And those are all things that we by experimenting and trying things, you find out. So that's what's fun about constantly trying things and trying, and all the different bowings. Say with you asked about the prelude itself, Mm. This is what I was trying to get here. See, it starts on the third note. And then we go to the, and sometimes I hear the wrong note somehow being emphasized. Okay, what am I doing there? I'm actually making double stops, aren't I? And then variety. I exaggerate to get my point across, but it's those kinds of things that also make the difference within the phrases. And the main thing is to hear. Often, you know, we hear the counterpoint. We need to make different sounds on the different, not let the sound be one-dimensional. We have to get different sounds on the different voicing and so on, all within, say, even the same bow stroke. So I think that if one is constantly, you know, and sometimes it's not so bad to play the suites on the piano, you know. You know, to get the chords, the sense of the chords, and then the chords, and then the phrases in between, it gives us a much clearer musical, whereas rather than struggling with some of our technical things and getting the cello to do what we want, especially the E flat. I mean, that's perfect keyboard writing. The Prelude is perfect keyboard writing. We could sit there and we could have the pedal down on the low pedal and then play the chord down and that kind of thing. And it's marvelous. And that helps us to get the sense then on the cello of what we need to try to find. That we're not playing a whole lot of individual notes, but we need to get that sense of the real total chord. You know, that helps us, I think. So we need to just keep studying and finding those things. That's why they never end. We're so lucky to have these suites. You know, it's sort of our cellist Bible, I think. It's sort of, there's no way we'll ever get to the end of them. No.
Joanne Grant asks, do you recommend consulting the original texts?
Say again?
Joanne asks, do you recommend consulting the original text?
Of course. That's you know, more than consulting. I think that one needs to be very guided by it because, you know, we're already going to a second opinion. We're already going to an edition when we're using all the other things. All right, we get ideas. We find out what other cellists have done, and they can sometimes be very good ideas, but it's still, to go to the horse's mouth, so to speak, is really, really important. I don't think one should get necessarily locked in, because that's not either going to give us exact performance either. We still have to try to get the musical understanding of what it is we're working with. It's the musical understanding over and above what the details are. But I mean, for instance, say there's a very wonderful philosopher or psychologist or so that's written some wonderful books about their thoughts that we really, you know, really respect. And then they have followers and students that also write about working with them and what those great minds said. And it's already going to be distilled. It's going to be a second, and sometimes actually it's a lot easier to understand what the genius was saying in the first place by what the student was writing. But on the other hand, there's something more, you know, you're getting the more pure, working with the more pure ideas, taking it firsthand. So I think it's a question of study of both. I mean, for instance, this last year, I got all these books. I was doing some research. I've got a whole bunch of books about Beethoven. It's been quite a year because it was a Beethoven year. And there's quite a few very wonderful new books about, and of course, the many things. What's very interesting is that uh, they're writing, of course, that much more about what was going on while certain pieces were being written, what was going on in Beethoven's life, for example. And I find that very interesting. But I still think the source of Beethoven's letters, Mozart's letters, are and of course the I love manuscripts too, and you can go to Beethoven House, for instance, and get a lot of the manuscripts or first early editions to find out some of the other editions that have come since. It can be very enlightening and very interesting, and absolutely. But we need to, if we're really wanting to study things, uh, I think that the source, the urtext and the source, is incredibly important, and I love it that more and more editions are coming out that have that. But still, in all, there are other musical things that are very not only interesting but also help to enlighten one about the music. And so that I think one needs to keep open. It just I think the main thing is to have certain kind of elements in one's thinking, about the sense of rhythm and harmony and uh, counterpoint. I'm talking about Bach again, of course, but it's and the musical understanding of, especially the musical trying to understand. I mean, it's not as if we ever have the definitive. Many of these wonderful composers, we feel we never get to the end of them. But the point is, it gives us that much more of a clue into to finding that essence. And I'm going to speak about this, and people say, "Oh, for heaven's sake, she's stuck back and whenever." But for instance, Casals did spend a great deal of time thinking about music. I mean, he'd be puffing on his pipe, and you just knew that he was contemplating, thinking about things a lot. But also, he spent a lot of time with any music and he analyzed everything for himself. I'm talking about his own work, analyzed every note. One got that. I mean, he spent so much time, and he also was very cultured. I mean, he had a great deal of cultural knowledge too about things, but he absorbed these things both from uh, from all the points of view, that then he became one of the could be such a spontaneous uh, uh, performer, so that one felt that he was almost improvising it, and yet it was so right. Sometimes, in lessons, it would happen. Sometimes when I was playing in the Casals Festival Orchestra, I remember one time you'd be sometimes the performances or the working on things. Uh, uh, he would work in great detail, and then he would start going with it, and you would have the feeling, of course, this is how it needs to be. You'd have the feeling that he had spent enough time with the music, that he had gotten that much closer to what the essence of that music was. You just have that feeling, oh, that aha moment, where you'd have the feeling that oh, that's how it has to be. And I think that's one of the things we have to just try to live with the music, so that we try to get that. And if we now and then hit it for ourselves, I mean, if it's just a gift, or if we experience it for ourselves in some way, or from somebody else, that's a gift. That's because you feel that, oh, okay, got it. That's what it's about. So uh, I don't know. We all just are searching always all our lives. That's what we get to do. So,
Sure. Bonnie, so we were originally scheduled to end at
I
on the
know, I
hour,
know.
but we're
Yeah,
a bit over.
yeah.
But we still have like dozens of questions left. If you're
Oh, how nice.
available, we can go on for a couple more minutes. But
Oh,
if
sure.
not,
That'd be fine. Yeah, that'd be fine. Well, thank you for doing that,
sure.
because I never would have been able to see them myself or read them myself from way over there on the laptop. So I'd be happy to come back someday, and we can talk some more or whatever. Yeah.
Sure.
But meantime, sure, if there's something interesting, that'd be good.
We could, yeah. Let's just go answer a couple of more questions, and then, if it's possible, we could schedule a follow-up cello chat where they're all wonderful questions from all of our viewers here at Cello Bellows. So, I
I'm very
think,
glad. This is the first one I've done, so I wasn't sure what would happen. So that's very nice. I'm glad there's that. I appreciate that people want to talk about things. It's great, and I really hand it to Cello Bello and to Paul for this idea, because, and especially, I remember right at the beginning when we were all in lockdown, I was watching them a lot myself, and just feeling connected, because it's a new world, and we're in a new experience, and it's got its moments, where we have to figure out how to take care of ourselves, and still find ways to have connections. So I really appreciate the response.
sure. Okay, so we have a question from, let's see, from Travis Beltrametti. He asks, wonderful. How much vibrato would you use in a Baroque piece like Bach or Vivaldi?
Oh well, what I was saying, I wouldn't use as much as I would in Dvorak or Schumann or so. I would, in Schumann, and where you're wanting to really develop your sound, and Dvorak, absolutely, where you want a big, a lot of it, big vibrant thing, you use a lot. With Bach, well, in the original idea, they did use some, they call it was some as an ornament. So it's part of the expressive expression of notes. So I think the main thing that is important, really important, is again what I started out with. We need an alive left hand. We don't want to just, if we think, okay, I'm not going to use vibrato, and make our hand just go still, it's going to be a little bit of a dead hand, and we're going to just be playing notes. No, we need to have that sense that the hand still has springs and it still has reaction to things. And I do it as a impulse with um, with the energy and rhythm of it. I guess I guess the real question would be, what do I do, or what does one do in the slower music where you have more melodic, and that's an interesting thing, because then you want to listen to singing and to the arias and so on. It still would be not the same kind of vibrant, alive, alive, wrong word, constant vibrato. Actually, this was an interesting thing. The idea of constant vibrato is a much more modern way of playing. I mean, even Casals or Chrysler or some of those older players, they didn't use as much vibrato in some of the older music. They use vibrato around the context of things. So that's one has to be very careful not to let, if one is decided not to use as much vibrato, still to have an alive left hand. And very important, I've seen that happen also with the bow, that when a person starts playing without vibrato, their bow goes kind of dead. No, we still need to be finding the overtone resonance. You see, music is vibration. We need to be having things alive, and so vibrato is just another of our tools, and thinking about using it to enhance the sound. I would use a different kind of vibrato. I'm trying to think right now an example. You see, I want to give more to the second beat, and I don't have to, but that's just part of my tools. I want to give more, so I'm giving a little bit of an energy to that second note but it's not a constant. It's not as if it's going on all the time. It becomes subtle, it becomes subtle, and it becomes a question of taste. And I think that one has to simply develop as one works with the music in this day and age, and we have so many performances available, recordings and all on YouTube and all kinds of ways, that one can get confused, and there can be a confusion of some very good playing that you just you wonder, is this really in the spirit of that composer? So I think I would answer it with Bach and Vivaldi. I would probably use some vibrato, some live left hand, live bow, absolutely, but not in the same way that I would with the romantic music, not at all. The same amount or the same, actually a much quieter also, not sometimes we vibrate pretty fast and pretty intensely with intense music and more later music. So I think it has to do with the music itself again.
Great. Bonnie, I think we should probably just close this, wrap
Okay.
up for now.
Sure.
But I think, right, we still have a lot of these questions. So I was wondering, after the broadcast, maybe we could schedule a follow-up cello chat as soon as
Sure.
possible. Just
Okay.
to all of
All
our
right.
viewers out there.
Well, I'm still not going anywhere, so I'll be here. That's for sure.
Sure.
Yeah.
We'll save all of your questions for the next time Ms. Hampton hosts a cello chat, and we hope you will tune in then. Uh, we yeah. Any closing remarks?
Well, just I really appreciate it, and I wish there was some way that I could have the sound. I know it's not possible and it's too complicated, but it would be fun if I could be really talking to the people that ask the questions and so on. So all I can say is that though I do appreciate you being interested, in trying, because look, as musicians, as performers, we're all in the same boat. I've been doing it for a long time. Started playing the cello when I was about 8, and I'm in my 80s now. So it's a long time. The point is that if you're in your 20s, if you're in your teens, wherever you are, you're on the same journey. We're the same. We're finding the same thing. And that's the wonderful part. And we're so lucky to have this guy, and also to have the music we have. We don't have as much as some of the others, the keyboard instruments and so on, but we have some wonderful, wonderful music. And that's why I centered this first one around Bach, because we're so fortunate to have that music. It just opens the door for us as young people to get started with the whole wealth of his music, which is endless. There's no way no one will get through it all, but just to one of the things I really love doing is playing continuo parts, in the cantatas and in the St. Matthew Passion and B minor Mass and so on, because you have the feeling that this is such a basic. That's what a cello gets to do. Is a basic kind of thing, and it's just incredible wealth of music that we have in our lives because we play this instrument, and besides, we know that it's the most beautiful instrument in the world, so we all know that. So anyway, good to be with you today. Thanks so much, and thanks again to Paul for inviting me and setting it up. So